talk about rationality during the age of Akbar.
Friends, I always find it very difficult. My task becomes more difficult when such kind words have been uttered about me. You probably would expect much more from me than I can deliver after the places that have been starred on. So thank you very much for your kind words. Today I would like to speak on the phenomenon or custom of life called reason in Persian Akbar. We often think of medieval communities, especially Muslim communities, as religious institutions. These men offering 5 prayers a day in the mosques and forming the community. We forget at that time that people have also other concerns, livelihood, pleasures, duties by the family and so on. So history is much larger than either that of kings or of communities. Now, and also, of course, of causes, of movements, both religious and secular, which have taken place in the past. I want therefore to speak on a particular feature of medieval Indian history, which was that of what today we would call secularism, but in the times that we are speaking of, one would call tolerance. If you look in medieval times at the medieval world, you would probably find that it was only 2 countries in the world, India and China, where religious tolerance prevailed. In no other country do you find this particular trend, social trend. And therefore, today, when there are, as you open your newspaper, there is the Hindu-Muslim dispute everywhere in this country, very unfortunately. Much more perhaps than it was the case in 50s and 60s and 70s. Then it becomes quite interesting to see how interreligious relationships were managed in earlier times. And it is here, of course, that Akbar's reign particularly comes to one's mind. Now, there can be many reasons for religious tolerance, but particularly in Akbar's case, there was an emphasis on reason, aql, or in Persian danish, which also means wisdom and knowledge, but is also used for reason. So there was, for the first time perhaps in India, an official espousal of reason as against religion. It didn't come immediately, it is very interesting how it came about. Akbar in his early youth was just like any other Muslim ruler, but with an obvious difference. He loved to live to go around among ordinary people when he was young. Sometimes he was not identified, sometimes he was not identified. And therefore, one begins with a ruler who knew how poor people lived. And it is therefore many actions, measures of his that need to be celebrated even today, despite the fact that he of course presided over an exploitative regime. Land revenue was very heavy, peasants were oppressed, and even ordinary people paid heavy taxes. All that was there, but there was something also different, and that was that he realized that in a country like India, Hindus and Muslims must live together, and therefore his religious policy is particularly important. Now, today, as we were just told in the introductory remarks, it is important to recall Akbar's religious policy because in our country today, secularism is under attack and is in great danger. So it is certainly important to remember what was done in the realm of religious tolerance under Akbar. I was looking at old documents in the National Archives and so on, and it was remarkable that as early as 1563, even only 2 or 3 years after he took command of his own position, although he had ascended the throne in 1556, but perhaps all of you know that it was only by 1560 that he came to exercise his personal power and to determine the measures of the state. And very early in that period, in 60s, as you know, first he abolished the pilgrimage tax in 63 and the jizya in 64, so that henceforth Hindus were not differentiated from Muslims as far as taxation prevails. In that respect, he built a state which was perhaps remarkable and would be remarkable even in today's world. I was handling the documents of Bengali Brahmins in Vrindavan. They all wrote in Persian as far as their important letters or documents were concerned. And it's remarkable how there is no sense of discrimination, not only in Akbar's time, but surprisingly even in Aurangzeb's time. There was no complaint at all. One would think that they were paying jizya in Aurangzeb's time, but apparently they paid no jizya because they were supposed to be religious men. Whatever the case, as you read these documents, it appears that the Mughal administration is totally acceptable to them, and they utilize all its institutions in their own disputes and for their own safety. So, it is important therefore to know how such an administration was established, and particularly under Akbar. Now, Akbar ascended the throne in 1556, as I've said, but he actually began to exercise authority only after 1560. And one of the earliest measures were the abolition of the pilgrimage tax and the jizya, the poll tax on non-Muslims. These were very important measures because henceforth there would be no discrimination between Hindus and Muslims in taxation or fiscal measures. And therefore, these dates are extremely important in Indian history, although one might not immediately realize it. He also threw open the higher ranks of administrative service to non-Muslims. And in 1564, by 1654, Udarmal is already from, as it appears from a document that he issued, obviously very important. He had received the title of Raja, he was a Jagirdar and a minister. And not only a minister, but a minister with a key portfolio of finance and revenue. So, but then also established a state where Hindus and Muslims would work together. It is therefore important to see how this policy was justified. And the spokesman for this policy, particularly in Akbar's later years, was Abul Fazl. Abul Fazl's letters, his work Akbarnama, and his further work, which technically was a part of Akbarnama, the Ain-e-Akbari, are all very important documents in Mughal history. So, I want to underline here how Akbar, directly by his own statements, but basically mainly through Abul Fazl, visualized India and the nature of the Mughal Empire as far as religious issues were concerned. Now, Akbar had a long period of what I would call religious questioning. He first wanted to appear as a Muslim king, although a tolerant one. So, jizya was first abolished, then reimposed, then abolished. In 1570s, there were the Adat Khana discussions in which Akbar sometimes tried to appear as a great Muslim reformer, both reformer or orthodox interpreter. And then, of course, by 1580, he gave it up because of the quarrels among the theologians, Muslim theologians themselves. And then, of course, his next step, in which he thought himself to be a religious leader of monotheists and the so-called Deen-e-Ilahi, which is of course a misnomer, but it would do for his religious views, in which he insisted monotheism could unite all religions. Although Abul Fazl found it was difficult to integrate Jainism into it because Jains are firm atheists, probably the most scientific of all religious people. They don't believe in God. So how to integrate them into the religious community is a problem that Abul Fazl leaves unsolved. But it is interesting that his description of Jainism is fairly detailed and fairly accurate. So, even religions which are atheistic had full right to exist in the realm of Akbar and his successors. In fact, there was no persecution of Jains as far as we know during the time of any of Akbar's successors. It is therefore important to see how Akbar and particularly Abul Fazl, because our knowledge about Akbar is mainly through Abul Fazl, his main biographer and historian, and also intellectual minister, or what one might call Minister for Religious Affairs, if one wants to use in modern idiom. How he thought to put Mughal Empire in India's cause. He was fairly well read. I think he had read Barni very well, the main historian of Delhi Sultanate, also other sources. Although he himself wrote on Akbar's reign only, and the Akbarnama, but he shows within this fairly good knowledge of the earlier historians. Now, if about ancient India, of course, their knowledge was totally wrong. It was based on certain myths, and even he did not even know about Ashoka, for example. And his knowledge of Buddhism was very limited, whereas he knew much more about Jains in their past. But the interesting thing is that he still tried to reconstruct the past, the pre-Muslim past of India, in which he is perhaps the first serious Muslim writer. And his chapter on Jainism in the Nine Akbari is particularly accurate, unlike his short account of Buddhism. In interpreting India's past, Abul Fazl had to deal with the whole issue of Islam. And I am here particularly concerned with the fact that Abul Fazl's critical view of Islam has been silently followed. But it is if one is studying a particular figure, it must be recognized that these thoughts existed. And unfortunately, when you speak of reason, the fact is that reason leads you to certain conclusions which are extremely disturbing. And this is the case of Abul Fazl. Now, how does Abul Fazl read the rise of Islam, for example? Translators of the Nine Akbari, even English translator, has not accurately translated that particular passage, because, and nor in Jadunath Sarkar, in his re-edition of Blockman's translation and Garrett's translation, corrected the mistranslation, because they were afraid of Muslim reaction. Abul Fazl takes the issue of prophethood directly. You see, as historians, we must forget that we are either Muslims or non-Muslims. And therefore, today, we must take the issue that we are studying Abul Fazl, then we must plainly see what he writes about prophethood. He denies the truth of prophethood. He does not accept the claims prophets. He quotes Akbar when he says that people outside India, when they wanted to raise themselves in public estimation, called themselves prophets. But in India, they could call themselves gods. This is a statement of Akbar reported by Abul Fazl. And therefore, to Abul Fazl, prophethood and the caliphate were disasters, political disasters. He says religious people should not claim to be sovereigns. Now, this statement is so radical that even, as I said, Blockman's and Jarrett's translation omits it. But historians can't do without it. This is a rational statement, and this can't be deleted from history. Of course, Abul Fazl does not go into details, but his position is clear. Religion can't decide politics. Politics decides religion. Religion is too serious a thing to be left to mullahs and bandits. It must be controlled by the sovereign. This is basically his position. And therefore, in effect, he is taking a very modern position of sovereignty. In modern political views, sovereignty is unlimited. It has no limits. Religion has to bow down to sovereignty. Religious law must make way for secular law and the concepts of political concepts and civil concepts of today, like equality and so on. And I think this is the real importance of Abul Fazl, that he anticipates modern ideas about sovereignty. Sovereignty is uncontrolled power, unlimited by any religious or any other customary institution. I'm afraid for this you have to read Persian, because the translations, both of Lockman and Jarrett, make too many concessions to Muslim prejudice, and often the very bold statements of Abul Fazl are either omitted in the translations or greatly modified. For example, his rejection of Prophet's claim to political power. He says that nothing is worse than religious men claiming political power. It is omitted from the translations. I think they were afraid of Muslim readers trying to see how this has been included. But as historians, one must take note of Abul Fazl's position, which was also, of course, Akbar's position, that religion, politics and sovereignty are two so serious matters for religion to interfere. And therefore even Prophet and the early caliphs, insofar as their claims were based on their religious position, were unacceptable in the light of the views that Abul Fazl espoused in Eminent. In other words, Abul Fazl anticipates modern secularism without using the word or without using the concept, but he believes that religious men have no business to intrude into political matters. And he is brave enough. You are thinking of 16th century India to write in Persian about early history of Islam has been vitiated by religious men trying to be sovereigns. Here is secularism without limitations. Now, there are other matters also, apart from such absolute invocation of secularism, which in today's India seems outdated, now that we have Hindutva in control. But there are other elements also, rational elements in Abul Fazl, which need to be celebrated. For instance, his total acceptance of science, although he was not a scientist, nevertheless his description of inventions attributed to Akbar or to Akbar's courtiers, and also his descriptions of different of irrigation wells and so on, show that he was also very interested in technology, and therefore that element also is very modern. How water is to be pulled up out of wells to irrigate is a question that interests me. Then again, is Persian. People have noticed that Abul Fazl's Persian is not only very difficult words, but tends to be de-Arabicized. Now that could only be done by a very good Arabic scholar, which Abul Fazl was. A normal Persian reader like me can't distinguish between Arabic and Iranian words, frankly. I wouldn't know whether Danish comes from some Arabic word or is an Iranian word. But Abul Fazl knew. And therefore, he tried to de-Arabicize Persian. I don't think this was a quite wise measure to do, and often you find that he forgets it and he is using highly Arabicized words, and then he suddenly remembers and recollects what he was doing and then again resorts to de-Arabicized Persian. It was very difficult to, at that particular time, to separate Persian from Arabic. So many Arabic words had entered Persian. Just like today, it is very difficult to de-Persianize Urdu, how much you might like it, because so many Arabic and Persian words have entered the Urdu language. And I suppose also the Hindi language, although it's not officially said. But I am actually interested in this matter because it shows how learned Abul Fazl was in both Arabic and Persian, and possibly Hindi, because he uses a large number of Hindi words, of which he immediately offers a Persian equivalent. So, if we are looking at our past and the learning, the knowledge gained in our past, then Abul Fazl is a very important figure. Both as a historian and I would argue, also as a philosopher. He is a secular philosopher. He doesn't allow religion to interfere in sovereignty. He criticizes the Prophet and Caliphs because being religious men, they still wanted to be sovereigns. sovereignty is superior to religion. This is a very important statement which he makes and thoroughly stands by. Although, of course, this involves the criticism of both the Prophet and the Caliph, but he does that. And I think Jarrett was translating this passage, was very concerned, so he omits the criticism of the Muslims in his translation. Probably wisely, because we Muslims don't believe in freedom of thought in these matters. But for a historian, this is important, that he believes very strongly that religious men have nothing to do with government, and therefore the claims to sovereignty by Prophet and Caliphs was wrong. It's omitted in the translation, but you can read it in the Persian text if you are interested in it. That such a brave statement should be made at that time, bold statement, and should be left uncontested. But Ayuni doesn't contest it. Although he is the critic, he doesn't contest this statement. And it's certainly, as I said, remarkable that it should just be ignored by Abul Fazl critics. But today, when we see the particular importance of secularism, then Abul Fazl certainly becomes important. A man who could defy and deny Muslim tradition in this bold manner. Of course, he similarly has criticisms for Hinduism also, like the criticism that anyone who becomes important declared himself a deva, or God. And the reason he offers, though he attributes it to Akbar, was that in India, why should people declare themselves prophets when they could declare themselves gods? That is Abul Fazl's explanation of why there has not been any prophet in India, but only in Persia, Zoroaster, and Arabic, Muhammad, and something else. But no prophet here. Because when Godship is available, why should you stop at prophethood? Now, this kind of strong, bold secularism is, in the world of 16th century, was remarkable. That it should be written into Ain and was one of Akbar's statements, and nobody should protest against it. Nobody throughout the 17th century ever held it against Abul Fazl that he was minimizing the importance and significance of prophethood. That is also remarkable. I mean, Aurangzeb, in one of his letters, says that Abul Fazl's style should be followed, but not his thought, but his talking. I mean, the main thing should not be followed, only his lofty Persian style. So, it is important, therefore, that rationalism, reason, which we see not only in words in Akbar and Abul Fazl, but also in practice. And I should, here, in the concluding portion, should also like to point out the civilizing measures of Akbar in following his practice. Now, as you know, slavery is permitted in Islam. Even concubines are there. And therefore, it's remarkable that as early as 1563, Akbar should prohibit slave trade. Slave trade. He did not immediately prohibit slavery, but he punished slave trade, prohibited slave trade. And a Persian merchant records his experience that when he was living in Agra, he found the ear of a person nailed into the wall, and he inquired whose ear it is. So it was the ear of a Persian merchant who, on leaving the city, was taking away a slave. So the Kotwal caught hold of him, cut off his ear, and nailed it to the wall as a warning that no slaves could be traded or no person could be enslaved in Akbar's dominions. And this is as early as 1563. So, in Akbar's reign, slave trade was prohibited. No one could be enslaved. No soldiers could go into villages under any pretense and enslave anyone. And even Badayuni, who attacks Akbar and his ministers for practically everything, says that in this respect they have to be praised. They have abolished slavery throughout the length of Akbar's dominions. Now, this is a matter for which they have not been given adequate credit by modern historians. When the British came to India, slavery was not an important institution at all. But nobody knew that it was owing to Akbar. Akbar totally prohibited slavery, and those who indulged in slave trade had their ears cut. Not a very civilized punishment, I would have argued, but still a punishment. This again is an achievement which is often unrecognized in our textbooks. I would also say that Akbar also promoted reason. I've already mentioned this in Abdul, but in general, of course, this did not apply to praise of himself, but as in general, during the Mughal Empire, reason was generally promoted. And this was something which could bring people of different religions together, Muslims, Hindus, and among Muslims, Shias and Sunnis, because reason could be espoused by all. Therefore, one very important feature of religious tolerance during Mughal times was based on this particular notion of the supremacy of reason. Then there was the further question which I have left for the last, an espousal of Hindu-Muslim enmity, religious enmity. When India became independent and India became a secular nation, Akbar's policy of religious conciliation was perhaps not so important a topic than it has become today, because that whole concept is being challenged today. Akbar and his supporters, his nobles, particularly men like Abul Fazl, were not necessarily rationalists. They were partly rationalists. Certainly Abul Fazl tried to aim at being a wholly rational person, but they were all committed to a kind of Hindu-Muslim unity which the country today lacks, frankly lacks. And it is therefore important today to go back to Akbar and Abul Fazl and their concept of India. Geographically, even British writers like V.S. Smith praised Abul Fazl for his concept of India. When Abul Fazl says that Kabul and Ghazni are the two gates of Hindustan, then there is a patriotic element which cannot be brushed away. So the concept of India, and for this is not relevant to our discussion today, but is relevant to today's India, that there is no praise of India throughout ancient India. In Sanskrit of ancient India, there is not a single verse praising India under any name whatsoever. Even the first reference to India is in Ashokan inscriptions, Buddhist, not a Brahmanical. And hardly ever does it occur again Bharat until you come to late Gupta times. And certainly the concept is much stronger in Persian writing than it is in Sanskrit. There was a gentleman in the Indian History Congress who represented the RSS there. And I, as usual, became very friendly to him, offering him tea all the time, which he usually accepted very easily. And I asked him to get me a single Sanskrit verse in praise of India written before 13th century. A single Sanskrit verse. And he brought all verses, but they were either in praise of princes or princesses or of Ujjain or or some other region, never in praise of India. And then I recollected Yuan Chang saying that India is a peculiar country whose inhabitants don't know that they inhabit India. I mean, it's obviously unlike China in the 7th century where everyone knew that I'm a Chinese. Here people say I am from Magadh or I am from Kosala or I am from Kalinga, but never I am from Bharat. He says, itching, if you want to have the particular reference in 7th century. It is Amir Khusro who gives the first national anthem of India in Persian. I think Dr. Nadeem Rizvi has written a paper on it, which I hope you will read. So far as I know, and up till now I have not been corrected on it, there is no Sanskrit or Prakrit poem praising India before the 13th century when Khusro was writing, 13th, 14th. Well, Akbar and Abul Fazl greatly strengthened the idea of India. If anyone writes the history of idea of India, then certainly Abul Fazl in Akbari, in which he says, as V.S. Smith particularly recording, that Kabul and Kandahar are the gates of India. And in order to protect India, you need to control these two. So this is the first, perhaps, statement in any language about India's geographical position, strategic position. Well, I would stop here. Thank you very much for giving me such a patient hearing. Thank you.
Before I invite the Secretary of the Indian History Congress to thank all of you, I would just remind something which represents the period of Akbar, the construction of the Kursi Krisa, where there were 3 localities which were put outside the wall limits. The Shaitanpura, the houses for the prostitutes, a locality for the Brahmins, and the locality for the mullahs. All 3 were located outside the towns, not within the town, so that they might not contaminate the Mughal society of Akbar's period. With this bit of information, I would now invite Professor Shirin Musfi to come here as Secretary of the Aligarh Historian Society and say a few words.
I am sure that we should also think that we should be thankful to Professor Nadeem Rizvi for letting us have the pleasure of listening Irfan Sahib after a very long time. And I am very happy to see that such a big crowd of younger ones, those who are the realities of tomorrow but the hopes of today, are sitting here, and I found that everyone was listening so attentively what Professor Irfan Habib was saying. Some of them might not have been fully understood him, but I think all of us were trying to get to the idea he was putting forward. An idea which was not only important for the students of history or for students, but an idea which is important for we Indian all at a time while we are living under such a regime which wishes us to kill each other, to fight against each other, instead of have a friendly relationship and rather live as the normal citizens of this country. So I think it is more important that we should learn a lesson about unity of the country, unity of the people, the fraternity as well, not only unity, from what we have heard from Professor Habib. Of course, all of us most grateful to Nadeem to let us have an opportunity to listen to Irfan Sahib after a long time, and I will rather congratulate him that he was able to persuade him and to come and to address us. Generally, he is nowadays not easily agreeing, so it's again to the credit of Professor Nadeem Rizvi to make us get another opportunity to listen to us. And I'm very happy that all of you have sat very quietly, listened to him carefully, and I hope you must have learned something from what you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for coming here. The program comes to an end, and I do promise that very soon we would be assembling once again under the aegis of either Aligarh Historian Society or ASHA, Aligarh Society of History and Archaeology, both of them trying to fight for a secular India. Thank you very much.